Hey, this is Joe from graybenchelec. Welcome back to the pedal teardown series where I take apart new and interesting pedals and show you what's going on inside. Today we have the one and only King of Tone from Analogman. Alright, Analogman King of Tone. So I know a few people have been waiting to see this pedal on the channel. I have also been waiting a little over 5 years, to be more specific. I joined the wait list at the end of March 2018, and you can see there I was a little optimistic about the wait period. But nevertheless, 5 years, a couple months later, I got an email saying, hey, your pedal's ready to be picked out. So I did exactly that, and here it is on the bench today. So, the King of Tone. Highly unlikely anyone watching this video has no idea what the King of Tone is. It is inarguably one of the most famous, well-known overdrive pedals of all time. It is arguably one of the most famous pedals of all time at this point. 2 modified Marshall blues breakers in one box. The standard configuration is you just cascade one into the other. This pedal was built so that you have essentially in and out from each side. If you don't plug in anything to the inside jacks, then it is cascaded like the original design. There are some modifications from the original blues breaker. Analogman added in hard clipping diodes between the second op-amp stage and the tone control. Analogman also uses some carbon comp resistors in specific places in the circuit. I've said on previous videos I don't really think carbon comp versus metal film makes a difference sonically. Obviously Analogman disagrees, and so we can continue disagreeing about that. There's plenty to talk about with this pedal. It shares a common theme with the Klon Centaur, which is that people make a big deal about the clipping diodes, and we'll talk about those in a bit. Right now, let's just explore the pedal itself. So we have the 1590B size enclosure, dual standard latching 3-pole double throw foot switches, 2 5mm LEDs for indication. Each foot switch turns on and off one side or one blues breaker, and you can turn them both on and they're series into each other. 3 controls per each: volume, distortion, and tone. Classic Analogman King of Tone graphics here with the logo King of Tone and the compass art that is famous for Analogman with the sun face inside. All the jacks are top mounted here, 1/4-inch jacks, and the Kobicon style DC jack there. On the back we have the Analogman We Do Pedals Right logo and trademark, or a catchphrase, I guess you could say. The exterior is it's a black painted. It might be powder coat. It's hard to tell. There's definitely a texture to it. The original color of the King of Tones was a purple color. That's probably what you've seen if you've seen them. I got black because, everything looks good in black. One interesting thing about the LEDs, it might be a little hard to see, but the exterior of the LED looks like it's been sanded down to sort of soften the light or create a bit of diffusion of the light coming out of the LEDs to make them, I guess, less harsh on the eyes. I would assume it's been done by hand. I don't know of any manufacturers that do that sort of thing, so that's an interesting little tidbit. I think that's about it for the exterior of the pedal. Let's go ahead and open it up. Alright, so here is the inside of the Analogman King of Tone. Starting with off-board components, we have the 1/4-inch jacks. These are all stereo switching jacks, which will be necessary for the dual ins and outs for each pedal. Like I said in the intro, the ins and outs from the outside jacks, that's the standard setup, and the blues breakers are just in series, like cascaded into each other. If you connect to the inner jacks, then you have one blues breaker coming out this side and one coming out this side, and you can put it into your switcher, or you can put other pedals in between, whatever you want to do. Without anything connected, it's just a standard King of Tone setup. Potentiometers are the Vimex potentiometers. It's interesting they've gone with the long leg PCB pots. That way they can sort of bend them over to reach the PCB here. I'm not quite sure why they did this. It seems like there would be enough room to slide the whole PCB up and align on these pins without interfering with the 1/4-inch jacks. My guess is they probably just have a ton of these PCBs and are just working through them and will maybe make that change. Or there just wasn't room to also move around the mounting points for these lower potentiometers. Not quite sure. It seems like a lot of extra work to have to very carefully and precisely bend over these pins so that they find the correct spots and also mount to the holes in the enclosure here. Components on the PCB wise, we have the Panasonic film caps. That's these maroon caps here. We also have some electrolytics. These appear to all be Rubicons. I can't quite tell for these caps in here. These are 100 microfarad to 25 volts. There is an R in a square, which could be Rubicon. As far as resistors, we have a complement of carbon film, carbon comp, like I mentioned in the intro, and some metal film resistors as well. There's also a couple, most likely multi-layer ceramic capacitors here, axial capacitors. These are probably in the feedback loops of the op amps. You can see the resistors are mounted in a vertical fashion. Ibanez and Boss have also done this sort of setup. It saves room on the PCB. It doesn't take as much space flat against the PCB, but it does make the PCB taller, which can be okay as long as you have an enclosure tall enough to still mount your back door. So we have 2 trim pots here. These are an addition from Analogman, a presence control. Turning them all the way down is sort of the stock blues breaker setting. You could turn them up to get more high end out of the pedal. The way I think of using these is sort of compensating for single coil versus humbucker. If you have single coils, which tend to be brighter, then you probably want to leave the presence more down. If you have humbuckers, which tend to be a little bit darker, you can turn it up to bring some of the high end back. In the middle here is a dip switch. These control the clipping diodes in the second op-amp stage's feedback loop, as well as the hard clipping diodes. Speaking of diodes, we have 3 banks of 4 diodes here, 1 strip here, here, and here. As I mentioned in the intro, these diodes have reached a mythical status similar to that of the Klon Centaur. The original King of Tones used 2 values of diodes, the Panasonic MA856 and the Toshiba 1S1588. Both of those diodes are very difficult to find. The 1S1588s, you can sometimes find those on eBay, but they tend to be coming from overseas, so the authenticity is questionable. The MA856, they're basically unobtainium. I haven't seen any for sale by anybody in a long time, not for any price or any dealer. A ready replacement for the MA856 is its sibling part, the MA858, very similar in spec. Those also are very hard to find. I was able to buy a small batch of them a few years ago. They were terribly overpriced, and I did a quick search recently and I haven't found any, so those are pretty much gone as well. Some replacements of the MA856 from the DIY community have been the BA2A2 and BA2A3. Those are also very hard to find now. The current in vogue choice for the MA856 in King of Tone builds is the BAS33. Those unfortunately also have been discontinued by the manufacturer, so those are still available right now, but they are going to get hard to find. So, you know, little tip, if you want to get your hands on some, now is the time. Here's a close-up of those diodes. You have a string here, a string here, a string here. The 2 strings here of 8 diodes, those do appear to be the MA856 or the MA858. It's a little bit hard to tell now because recently there was a post on the gear page. Mike Pierre posted his box of diodes he's been using for the King of Tone. And while the box is very clearly labeled MA856 or the other part number, the MA2C856, it's the same diode. Data sheet for MA856 very clearly shows it only having 1 yellow stripe, whereas these have 2. The MA858s that I bought had 2 stripes. So it's been conjectured that Panasonic may have sent MA858s to people who ordered MA856s because the specs are so similar. So there is a slight possibility that King of Tones are using MA858s, even though Mike Pierre's box of MA856s are marked MA856. Jury's a little bit out on that one. The other bank of diodes here are no longer 1S1588s from Toshiba. These are now just standard 4148 or 914, same diode. Clipping diodes, silicon clipping diodes there. You can see on the side here we have 2 components marked with a capital H in green. That is pointing to the modification that I paid for with this King of Tone, which is the high gain on the red side. It's a very popular modification. When you go to order a King of Tone, you're offered up a whole bunch of options. I chose a couple of them, as you can see, the high gain, the separate jacks are an addition. What's interesting is in the DIY world, the only change that's expected for the high gain modification for the King of Tone is a swap to this resistor here. So this resistor, hopefully you can see, is a 100K resistor. If we compare it to its sibling resistor on the other blues breaker, that is a 1K resistor. This resistor lives in the feedback loop of the first op-amp stage, and by adding an extra 99,000 ohms of resistance to the feedback loop, you're going to get more voltage gain, which is going to cause more clipping in that op-amp stage for that side of the blues breaker. As far as I know, this is what makes the high gain modification high gain on the King of Tone. So it's interesting that these 2 components are marked H. It implies that these 2 components are in some way selected for the high gain side. I don't know exactly what selection process that is or what that entails. The matching capacitor over here is the same value. It's a 1 microfarad film capacitor. Op-amp, as far as I can see, is also a 4580, JRC 4580 dual op-amp. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what this signifies. I will say for a period of time, it appeared Analogman was actually painting a stripe. They're actually changing the color code on the resistor to try and hide the, I guess, identity of the high gain modification. It doesn't appear they're doing that anymore. So there is a slight suspicion that these high gain markings could be a fake out of sorts, that they're just meant to sort of throw people off. But I'm not going to make that sort of claim because I don't know. But I thought that I would just point that out, that while the resistor value is definitely different here, there's also some markings on this gap and this op amp. Exactly what they're pointing out, I'm not sure. Speaking of the op amps, like I said, they are 4580 dual op amp from JRC, Japan Radio Corporation. The ICs are socketed, which is nice. That means, one, if they fail or burn out, whatever, you can swap them out for new units, no problem. In addition, you can also experiment with different op amps. The 4580 follows a pretty standard dual op amp 8-pin dip package layout. And so a TLO 72 would work, a OPA 2134, NE 5532, all the popular dual op amps used in guitar pedals, you probably can swap out for the King of Tone here. Like I said in previous videos, I don't think changing out op amps makes a big difference. I doubt that you could narrow down any specific sonic changes to just the op amp, but if you wanted to try it and let your ears be the judge, you can easily do it on the King of Tone here because of those sockets. One other interesting thing I wanted to point out here is this little scrape on the PCB here. At first glance, I thought it was just like an accidental little bit of damage to the PCB just during the manufacturing process. You know, that kind of stuff happens. But no, in fact, it is intentionally done to break the trace that is running across here. My guess, most likely, is that trace is what cascades one blues breaker into the other when you don't get the specific in and out jacks from each side of the blues breaker. So they break that trace and essentially wire that into these two jacks. And when you don't have them connected, this connection here is actually made through the jacks. You could do this a lot simpler on a future PCB design by, instead of having to break this trace with some sort of mechanical cutting tool or whatever, you could just put two solder pads, like two surface mount pads right next to each other, and then just put a little ball of solder to bridge the gap when you want the standard King of Tone orientation. Another sign that Analogman probably has a ton of these PCBs and are just working through them. That's probably a modification I would guess that they would make on a future revision of the PCB. All right, so I believe that is it for the inside of the Analogman King of Tone. Let's go ahead and put it back together. All right, that was a teardown on the Analogman King of Tone. If you have any questions or recommendations for a pedal you want to see on an upcoming teardown episode, let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate you hitting the like button and subscribing. I'm Joe from Graybench Electronics. Thanks for watching.